Okay, so I'm Khyati Shah. I work at Morningstar as Senior .NET Engineer. And what I'll be talking about today, code reviews, is something I was skeptical about in the beginning. Many years back, I thought it's another process being introduced, but over time, I have understood the value of code reviews, and some of it might be an extension of what Todd has spoken about. But the way we'll go about is first, why review code? Then we'll just discuss some of the pointers you can have when you look at code demos as time permits, and then the industry trends of how code review is currently going on. So one of the primary reasons for reviewing code is over time your code will be the single source of truth of your software. Every team undergoes transitions. Your requirements change and they are not up to date. You have emergency bug fixes, everything changes. Your test cases are not up to date at times, but what will remain is your code. And because your code is a single source of truth, you should try to check in your database scripts, your infrastructure code, everything in your repository. And code review greatly helps keeping the code quality pristine, because the importance is there over the long term of the software lifecycle. Second, if you've seen in the last couple of decades, coding is now a team activity rather than a person activity. You don't have an operating system named after a person any longer. You have communities driving open source. You have teams driving code. So because it's owned by the team and not a person, your code should adhere to some standards which are set by the team, and code reviews again they help over there. Thirdly, we've all had these pull requests. We work for a couple of days, and at the end of it, our pull request has 5 lines, a dozen lines of changes, which would take you less than 5 minutes to type. But it took you 2 days because you were reading, debugging code. You read it much more than you write code, which is why you need to make sure your code is always readable. Going for mentorship. So every developer has a blind spot. What could be my blind spot could be someone else's strength area. So when you review code, you bring the team's strengths to the table, and this greatly helps familiarize teams with code faster. So if I want to replace some other person, if I've reviewed that person's code, I have some idea of what was in the bug or the feature or the commit. And for junior developers, it really helps them come up to speed faster, because the senior person can provide a lot of insights just by looking at code, which the other person would take time to come up to. So that mentorship is a very critical factor, which is why we should review code. Again, goes without saying, bugs caught over here provide a lot of cost savings. It's a stage, like you get it in QA, there's more people involved, there's more discussions. You get it in UAT, it goes further up. Client, it should never go, but that's costly for your project. So if you have bugs caught in code review, you save a lot of money, man hours for your project. And more importantly, the bugs, some of which are caught in code review, very very quickly, they will stay hidden in your software for a very long period, because they come only in some particular paths or some particular inputs, which is not the common use case. And that is the thing which we'll be focusing on right now, that how can you spot bugs just by looking at code. So that's also one of the reasons you should look at code. And when you look at code, try to find bugs. Just compile it in your head and try to find bugs, when you look at code. And the last thing is, code wasn't written in stone. We all have come across legacy projects, and we are scared to touch them, but someone before us wrote that code. Just take the plunge, explain it to your manager that it needs to be done. You cannot keep patching bad code. So it wasn't written in stone. Feel free to change it, and if there is some scope in a pull request where you see bad code piling up, feel free to just explain to the developer it needs to be rewritten, and go for it. So this is a very long list. I'll not go through all of it, and some of it Todd has covered. But the third point is something which we've come across: spelling mistakes. People say code should have good spellings, but I want to emphasize spellings is a very important thing. So I considered for a project. It was a commercial real estate company, and you can imagine how many times the word acre comes in commercial real estate. And by the time I got on the project, it was outsourced and the code was bad. Every single time, AngularJS, .NET code, database, acre was misspelled. It was a pain to read that code. So if you are the one doing spelling mistakes, please use spell checker. And if someone's making spelling mistakes, then please point it out in code. It's a valid comment. And the fourth one is super important. Just leave the problems of the future to the future. You do not know what the future problems are, so you cannot solve them, and those might not even come. Don't prematurely optimize code and introduce these deep inheritance hierarchies. They really spoil code. If your user base is 6 people, don't optimize it for what if we have 100,000 tomorrow, because your use case is 6 people. So just keep those things in mind when you write code. Don't optimize prematurely. Just optimize when the time comes. So I just have some demos, and we'll use the Chrome browser. I mean, it's pretty readily available. Okay, so my emphasis over here is basically to see if you can spot the bugs over here. Okay, so what you see on line 2 is an average function. It gets the sum of the elements in the list and divides it by the length. But this will fail obviously when you have an empty list, because for an empty list you should have 0, and you'll have a not a number or something over here. So that's a failure. Easily catchable in bug reviews, but you will not catch it in QA unless you have sufficient test cases or your QA person is interested in calculating the edge cases. I know Joe doesn't like functions, but my primary language is .NET, so please bear with me. So this is a table. Again, many people in JavaScript, they do existence checks with a double exclamation. But before you do existence checks in your if clause, you should know what is empty, what is not empty. If you look at this, I have a table of expected and actual, and in which I'm doing a check if empty. 0, 0 over 0, which is not a number. This is an empty object, and this is an empty array. And I would expect false in all of those. But in the last two, I get a true. The last two is an empty object and an empty array.
So aren't they actually empty?
Exactly.
Oh, that is the point.
I mean, some things are relevant to me because I'm a newbie JavaScript developer, but before we have these conditions, like if the parameter then return true, else false, we should know what is the parameter over here, in which cases do we want to treat it as an empty object. So we should just refine our existing checks conditions in JavaScript, because that is one area where people make mistakes. One thing is, when you are dealing with sensitive data, healthcare, finance, it happens all the time. You should be very wary. So here I have two functions: allocate funds for user. I'm passing a social security. This is the current balance, and this is what I want to deduct. So obviously in the first case, I have 5,000 as the balance, 2,000 I want to deduct, fair. Second case, 2,000 balance, 5,000, I have to log an exception. So I log an exception saying insufficient funds error, and I log the user ID. But this is a bug, because you log your the logging tools nowadays are Splunk or many readily available log analysis tools, and these tools have admin teams watching them, and you should never log sensitive data to the log streams. So a correct approach would be to comment this out. And mask it. So anytime you're dealing with sensitive data, this is a security bug which you should see in code reviews. Your QA person will not see it unless this exception happens, and this is something you should watch out for always. So we all iterate over loops, so I mean across the entire length of the loops, and this is one example of iterate which has a little fancy syntax. So what I do is, I have a list, I iterate start with I equal to 0, and this is the if condition, list of I, which will be true if there's an element at that location and I plus plus. So effectively, what it will do is it will iterate over all the elements of the list. This has two bugs. First is a performance bug. You want to loop over the entire length, so you shouldn't require to look up the array index every now and then. Second thing is, if even one of the element in the list gives a false, referring back to our previous example of empty, not a number, 0, false, empty string, this will break out, which it shouldn't, because you want to iterate over the entire list. So this is a better approach of iterating. You have a list, length cached once, and then you just iterate through the length, and the performance difference is real. So I generate natural numbers, very high list. I iterate first time with that list, and second time I iterate smart with the caching of the length.
Click on the gear. The gear, yeah. The gear
Which
on
one?
the right.
All right.
The right blue gear.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, you see that the time difference is real. It's 56 and 167, and in real cases you will not have something like just an a plus plus in the loop. You'll have a lot more, so the penalty will be a lot more for simply not caching the length. So it's good to have a fancy syntax, but think before going fancy. So okay, fine. So I'll just
You got time. Keep going.
okay. I don't know. So I think this I'll not demonstrate, but what I wanted to demonstrate here is if you're implementing a pattern, do it right, else don't do it. So in this case,
That's good advice.
Bravo.
so yeah, singleton. I mean, in AngularJS, it's very famously used, singleton pattern, and the basic use of it is you should have only one instance of a global variable. You could use it, when you want to have a cache or something, just one instance of a cache. But here I'm creating 3 instances of a global cache because of a single mistake that I'm not doing a null check. This is actually the singleton pattern. It's not popular among some developers, but the point is to get the pattern right. I mean, so with a null check, it will call the create only once, and the second time it will return an existing instance. So if you see, this is the purpose achieved. I mean, so if you're doing a pattern like MVVM is very common in some frameworks, just get it, review the code accordingly. Okay, I don't know how much time I have.
You've got 4 minutes now.
Okay. This is so equality, 0.1 plus 0.2, 0.3, we would expect that console.log r equal 0.1 plus 0.2 should be 0.3, should return true, but the way floating points are represented is exponent matrix notation. So if you look at this, it's false.
Yeah.
This is like, so you need to be very watchful of floating point errors, because this is one thing we encountered. Your portfolio is equal to stocks plus bonds plus cash, and the user enters these things, and we were throwing a validation error, it's not equal to 100, and the user was like, what am I doing wrong? And this was a silly bug which we had because we were not sensitive to, we were doing a complete equality, which you cannot do with floating point numbers. There's a 2 fixed and 2 precision method available, but what I usually do is I pass the tolerance interval. So if the values are within this much, it's fine, as it's a bug. So it depends on your business use case, what is the tolerance. And in the second case, I'll have it true, because the difference is very, very small. So
Khyati,
Yeah.
I have a question. Sorry to interrupt, but so first of all, I like what you said about readability, and I also agree that function declarations are way better than function expressions. Like, clearly better. No, sorry. But my question is, so with code, I'm just present. So with code reviews, one of the things I always struggle with is, like, how much responsibility do I bear, right? Should I pull down the code and actually test it? Because sometimes it feels like you're like, okay, well, it must work because they put it in PR, and so like, where does it? Right, which is probably a terrible assumption. but if I don't do that, then I could spend my entire day just testing other people's PRs. So where do you fall on that?
I think code reviews is just reviewing code. It's not about testing. So usually when you're familiar with the code, you can actually spot that this area will throw a bug which you can point out. But again, code review is a very heavy activity, and if you're doing code reviews in half an hour approving code, I think we are missing out something. It is a very intense activity as much as coding, because in coding at least you can run, but in code reviews you have to actually compile and make a mental object of the entire code repository. But I don't think testing is on the code reviewers' plate.
Okay.
How do you manage the I have 40 hours of work to do for myself this week, why should I spend 3 hours checking his crappy code?
Yeah, we've had this, and it again depends on the organization's overall goal. Code reviews should be valued, and the code reviewer should be actually thanked for spending time. In the end, it is the higher goal of what the team can achieve than how much time I spend. So I mean, if it helps the team, just
Yeah, I think
It's not his
same
crappy
argument as
code, it's
testing.
your crappy code too.
It will be my crappy code.
Right.
3 hours now is
It
better than 10 hours
everybody's
later.
crappy code. And
Right.
that's part of it, is that this gets rid of code ownership.
Yeah, and I mean, code review and testing, writing tests, I mean, that's part of your estimation process as well. And when you estimate something, yeah, I could do it in 2 hours, but with code review and testing, a little back and forth, and some UX guy's gonna come along and fuck with me about it, now it's 6 hours.
40.
That's just the way it is.
40 hours.
I'm curious what, pushing back earlier in the process, we found a lot of value in like design review, especially because by the time someone spent and tested code, if you then look at it and said, oh, this was a big mistake, you should never have done it this way.
Yeah.
Now, you've wasted a real long time. So are you guys also working with design reviews or?
no.
Okay.
And the reason is, what I read I think, I don't know which book I read it, but designs, I think they emerge over time. So when you start a project, you can only have a high level design goal. I have never seen a project in which class level designs have even worked, because when you see a problem, you see a pattern or a designer's solution to it, rather than something which you can start and plan from ahead of time. So I have never seen designs work from the start.
Well,
I have two questions, if you don't mind. What are you using a specific version control software for your code reviews?
So we use Atlassian software, but the best one is the GitHub software. for
Okay,
code
so with the
reviews.
pull
It's the
requests
best.
through there. Okay.
Is that what you mean, you're using Bitbucket?
Yeah, the Bitbucket one. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
even remember the name because I don't like it.
Sure. The second question is, have you considered using any automatic code checks, like functions have to have associated unit tests, or it fails to even create the code review request or the pull request in your case?
Yes.
So, okay.
That's a part of the larger CI cycle.
Okay.
So when you have a feature pull request, these reports they run, and code. So in fact, that's my next slide. You, as an experienced developer, you can contribute a lot more by going above the basic things like naming and everything. You can talk about solid principles.
Spell checker.
Spell check. You should have spell check
That's a good
integrated.
one.
But yeah, you can contribute much more than the basic things. So for that, we should have tools integrated in them.
Okay.
something else to consider beside just what software to use is to actually print it on paper and get away from the machine and sit there and read it in an entirely different frame of mind.
You're gonna kill trees?
Yes, yes, specifically
Recycle
trees.
paper.
Put some more paper.
In your 40 hours too.
I'm not going to do that.
So, again, can you post this somewhere and post a link to it on the
Yeah,
meetup site, or send it to Joe and we'll figure out where to put it? Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So the code reviews, so do you have it formal or informal? Do you just ask people to take a look at my code and give me feedback, or do you have a few people get in the room and looking at it line by line, or what do you do?
So we have Git hooks. You cannot merge to the mainline repository unless you have approvals.
Yeah.
When we make a pull request, we just tag a couple of people whose code review we seek, and once one of them approves, we can merge. So we've not made it very strict, but at the same time, you cannot merge to the mainline without at least one approval. And we try to keep our pull requests short because when you refactor, it's a lot of changes, but other than that, you should not make a habit of having very large pull requests because bugs invariably creep in the large pull requests. So that's what I mean.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.